Welcome to Australian Fairy Tales, the podcast. The Australian Fairy Tale Society delights in taking a deep dive through time, culture and language to explore fairy tales from an Australian perspective to discover what flesh they wear today. Through this podcast, you'll meet some of our fairy tale enthusiasts. G'day. My name is Annie Stewart, and it's my great pleasure to welcome Laura today. First and foremost, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners and the elders past, present and emerging of the land on which I stand, which is that of the Yagara and Turrbal people in Brisbane. I acknowledge the traditional owners on the land on which our listeners stand and extend a welcome to you and those of your country. And Laura, where are you from?
So I live and work on the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, which is northwest of Melbourne in Victoria.
Okay, let's introduce you. You're one of the guest speakers at the upcoming conference, and I've just got your bio here.
Mm-hmm.
You'll be presenting a talk discussion, The Rickety Old House, My Fairy Tale Childhood. But let's learn a bit about you. You're a dual US Australian citizen whose recent creative practice PhD explored how the adopted person may address issues of identity, origin and belonging through creative writing. You're now devoting your time to writing a novel, or did you just say you'd finished it? We'll find out. And you've previously published in the US, Australia and UAE. That's United Emirates, is it?
That's correct. Yep. United Arab Emirates. Yeah.
Staff writer, ghostwriter and project writer. So it's my great thrill to welcome Laura Fulton and ask, let's start with your dual citizenship and where you're from.
Yeah, so that's a harder question than it sounds. Broadly, I'm from Arkansas. It used to be a pretty simple question when people asked where I was from, but I just spent 4 years picking apart that question and answering exactly where it is I come from. So the short answer of where I'm from is I've got that down to a sentence. So I would now say that I was born in the Mississippi Delta region of southern Arkansas, and I grew up in northwest Arkansas in the Ozarks.
So both those places, in my mind, are rich with story, the Mississippi Delta and where were they again? And up in the mountain.
The Ozarks of northwest Arkansas. The Ozarks is a region that covers a few different states, but where I grew up was in northwest Arkansas. The University of Arkansas is there. It's the head of Tyson Foods and Walmart, and it's starkly different to southeast Arkansas, which is the opposite corner of the state, which is very, very poor, very economically depressed, very different in landscape and industry. Quite different.
So did those landscapes inform the stories that you might have heard?
Dramatically. There are similarities, but the southeast Arkansas is quite influenced by the Mississippi River. Everything you can't avoid the influence of the Mississippi River and the Delta region, the farming region that resulted in the overflow of the Mississippi that runs along either side. There's a long history that goes back. That whole region was created from the silt that goes back to prehistoric days, and that the richness of the land there is what caused centuries of slavery, because it was such an agrarian. It was so ripe for the agrarian industry that people didn't want to give it up, and that was the main cotton and rice, especially. That was the main source of industry for centuries because of the Mississippi River. But it's such a huge influence, and because of the cultures that were brought to the region from Africa, Mexico, the Native American, the First Nations people that were all in and around and from that place, immigrants from the Europe, Germany, Ireland, Wales, the UK, like they all went to that place because of that river and what the land could provide.
So, dual citizenship, what got you to Australia?
A cute boy. Always a guy. So I went traveling when I was 30 years old and went first to the United Arab Emirates, where I was living and working, and met my husband, who was Australian. And we were both living and working there for about 10 years. And then we came here. We will have been here for 11 years Boxing Day. So we've been in Australia for, nearly 11 years.
Does this feel like home?
In a lot of ways, yes. There are a lot of ways in which I feel like I don't always fit in entirely. I think I'll always be a little bit on the outside, but yeah, I don't imagine myself. I can't imagine the circumstances under which I would go back to living in the US again. I feel like I'm sort of in between the two cultures now.
So some of your time in the Emirates, you spent writing, so there was an interesting book and contribution there. Do you want to fill in a little bit of that time?
Yeah, so I started, I've been writing, I've been telling myself stories for as long as I can remember, for as long as I was able to conceptualize what a story was. From the time I was a very, very little girl, toddler, I was telling myself stories and writing down, little bits and pieces of things from the time I could hold a pencil. But I didn't really begin doing work as a writer until my oldest son was born. I was 35 years old, and that was just by accident that a friend took a job as an editor of a magazine and called me and said, I've just taken this job and I need some content, and you have a master's degree in creative writing. Can you write an article for me for a magazine? And I said, gosh, I've never done that before. She says, whatever, I believe in you. I need it next Friday. So, so I did my first freelance article. And from there, I did more freelance work, which turned into a job as a staff writer for a different lifestyle magazine similar to Time Out. And one of the jobs I did with that magazine was a column. It was called the Motherload column, writing just a funny little column about funny little stories about raising kids in the capital in Abu Dhabi, and rushing from here to there and traveling with the kids and places to go with the kids and things to do with the kids. And so from that column, I ended up writing a book, a collection of memoir stories, and it's written in a similar style to a column. So it's one that busy moms could pick up and put down, and just written in little snippets of just funny stories of a busy mom rushing around to keep up and traveling with the kids and giving birth to the kids. I have a list of 50 things you can say to a woman that are more who's giving birth, that are more productive than just breathe. Because when my husband was on his third and fourth child, that was honestly the most useful thing he could think of to say to me was just breathe. And I'm like, babe, this is not your first rodeo. Surely you come up with something better than just breathe. If you gave me 5 minutes, I could come up with 50 things more useful than just breathe. So I tried that as an exercise, and I did. So that's an appendix in that memoir. So so that was what that book was. And so far, that's my favorite book that's out on the market.
But you've just completed a PhD?
Yep. So at the end of in that blur of time, that was 2 years of lockdown, I finished the last of it. I guess it would have been the end of 2020. Yeah, I finished and it was all signed off and approved end of 2020, called Finding Home. Oh gosh, that's the short answer. I couldn't even tell you the long version. It's been that long, I can't even tell you the long title. But it was about using creative writing experimentation to explore identity. So that was a blended document that I presented as a field journal. that included personal writing, creative writing, critical writing, images, like personal images, images of craft work that I did. It was a series of creative writing experimentation, and that the experiments that I did in attempting to find my way home, I guess it would be the way to put it, and exploring what home can be and where home is. Yeah, so rather than writing one complete work, rather than writing a complete novel or a complete memoir or a complete collection of poems or a complete screenplay, I wrote a series of experiments, and the finished product ended up being an exploration of what worked about each experiment and what didn't, and what led me from one to the next. Yeah, and why I
to coming home, but adoption as well. Is that?
Yeah, and it was specifically about my experience as an adopted person, but it's one that could apply to anyone exploring any aspect of their identity, and how creative writing experimentation can be used as a method of exploring a person's identity within any context.
So the theme for your presentation is the rickety old house, my fairy tale childhood. So we don't want to steal any of your thunder from the presentation. People will have to come and listen to you. But what drew you to fairy tales?
So I have been familiar with fairy tales for as long as I can remember. My sisters and I watched The Wonderful World of Disney, was on every single Sunday night, and we never missed that. We grew up with all of the fairy tale stories and loved it, and we always identified with that princess, and we saw ourselves in that role. And that was a narrative that was really reinforced with us growing up in the American South in the 1970s, and growing up in a very conservative Protestant church that also underscored all of those themes of the damsel in distress and the Prince Charming coming to rescue you, and that you should be waiting for your happily ever after, and 16 is a great time to get married, and all of those ideas of the traditional 1930s Disney princess. It all just seemed to go hand in hand for us. And looking back now, I can see what's sort of toxic about a lot of the experiences of the traditional Disney princess. But at the time, the stories of those fairy tales, that was a coping mechanism that I used in a lot of ways, for my own self-preservation, which is something that I want to talk about in the presentation that I'm giving at the conference. So in spite of all the things that are kind of grim, no pun intended, about fairy tales, and sort of not always helpful to a modern feminist audience, for me, they were quite beneficial.
Disney was known for sort of changing the movies and these movies or whatever you saw. Have you been back to the originals to see how it compared and changed?
Yeah, I mean, I think there has been quite an evolution of the Disney princess. Certainly, the original Cinderella, Snow White, some of those, there was quite a lot of the emphasis was on being rescued rather than being the rescuer or being self-sufficient, and a lot of the modern Disney princesses are much more independent and autonomous. Moana specifically, the Frozen gals. I have two little boys, so I can tell you all about the professional wrestlers and less about the. I don't know the stories as well, but I am familiar with those. But my own experience of growing up with the more traditional princesses. There was less of that, but at the same time, I did see I did see Snow White standing up to the evil queen. And while the seven dwarfs came along at the end, she was not as helpless and retiring as what she is sometimes made out to be. And I did see, there was there was a level of independence. There was a level of independence in those princesses that did not exist in my own life. And they were much more, brave and autonomous than what I believed, than what I saw of any of the women in my own life. So by comparison, those Disney princesses, in comparison to the women that I sat next to in church, who spent their entire lives doing nothing but cleaning houses and looking after children and washing clothes, those Disney princesses were badass, and everything that I wanted to be, and not at all the norm of what was expected of me. So I saw them as role models in comparison to what I saw in my own life.
I was thinking when I knew I was going to talk to you, now there must be a lot of fairy tales where there's orphans or they went to live with other people. Were any of those stories, not if it's going to be part of your presentation, that stuck in your mind that you were like?
You know what? I didn't really identify with that part of it. I didn't really see that side of it. And I'll talk about it. I'll talk about it more in the presentation. But that was not a thing that I looked at, and I'll talk about why in the presentation. There were some really specific reasons why. We didn't really look. We looked that there was a quote in my presentation that in my PhD where adoption is often, we look through the adoption rather than at it. It's often used as a plot device. And so we don't often examine the adoption itself, but rather look at as a plot point and as a way of getting from here to there.
And so it was through Disney really that brought you to fairy tales. Did you have books at home or?
Oh yeah. We had all the books. We had all the side tales. We had one, and I'm wondering if maybe someone is able to tell me. Maybe there will be someone at this conference who can tell me. We had one story of Peter Pan that I remember, and I don't know where it came from, but I remember I have such a clear memory of watching a cartoon of Peter Pan. And it's the first time I can remember anyone on television breaking the fourth wall and looking directly at the screen. And I remember being a very little girl, and my mother was this very practical person. She grew up on a farm in West Texas, and she spent her summers chopping cotton, like chopping the weeds from between the cotton plants. And she was very, very, very practical person, and not an imaginative person at all. A beautiful woman, wonderful mother, but just not prone to fancy. And we were all watching, and it must have been on The Wonderful World of Disney, but I've researched it and I've tried to find it as a movie, and I've never been able to find it. But in this episode show, Tinkerbell was a giant bitch. Like she always was, right? She was just a massive little bitch. And she was always ratting him out and kind of going behind, and she was very toxic. And she'd done this once again, and she'd given him up, and she'd done something. I can't remember what she'd done, but she was very angry with Peter Pan, and she had gone behind his back and done something. And in the story, Captain Hook had brought a little vial of poison, and he'd poisoned Peter's drink. And so it was that horrible dramatic irony where we all knew that Peter's drink was poisoned, and Tinkerbell knew that the drink was poisoned. But she was mad at Peter for who knows what. And so Peter goes to drink the drink, but he's distracted by something, so he puts it down. And we're like, my sisters and I are, no, don't drink the drink. And then he goes to pick it up a second time, but he's distracted again. And we're like, no, don't drink the drink. And he always sets it down a second time. And he goes a third time to drink the drink. And Tinkerbell has been watching this, and she's growing more and more distressed every time he goes to drink the drink, because she knows there's poison in it. And she somehow played a hand in the poison ending up in the drink. And the third time he puts the drink to his lips, and she knows the poison is there. So she flies in between, and she drinks the drink herself to save Peter. And she's lying in his hands, and she's dying in his hands. Does this sound familiar to you? We'll have to ask.
No, we can ask people, and people might watch this and they'll come and talk to you when they get to.
I need to know, because there's the moment, and her light and the fairies, the brighter they shine, that we know they're alive, and her light is beginning to dim, and and we hear the voice from off the camera of one of the Lost Boys saying, Peter, ask them. And he looks at the camera, and he looks right down the barrel of the camera and says, if all the children clap their hands. And this is the thing, clapping your hands. If you believe in fairies, clap your hands. We all have to know this. It's a fairy tale thing. And we're sitting there staring. And how many times has my mother said to me, what you see on TV is not real, right? Because you're just imagining things. And I spent my whole life living in this fantasy world in my head, right? And a million and one times my mother said to me, be here now and pay attention, and like you're imagining something again, and snap out of it and close your mouth, you're dreaming again, and pay attention to what's happening. And so she said to us 10,000 times that what you see on TV is not real. So here's Peter Pan looking at us in our eyes through our TV screen saying, if you believe in fairies, clap your hands. So we're all just sitting there not doing anything. And my mother, of all people, who can raise food and can preserves for the winter, who chopped cotton from between the cotton plants all her whole childhood, says, well, girls, clap your hands. Because we're sitting sobbing because Tinkerbell is dying in his hands. And we're like, Tinkerbell's gonna die. What are we gonna? And my mother says, clap your hands. So we all start clapping our hands. And what do you know? Here comes Tinkerbell, and the light starts to glow. And Peter says, it's working, clap, clap. And we're clapping furiously. That had to happen. I know that really happened. And I have yet to find any reference to that show or that episode, but that had to have happened. Like that, there must have been
there must have.
Like a special episode,
was it?
I don't know. I don't remember. I would have remembered Robin Williams.
Sounds like it's going to be a wonderful session. So this October, our conference, we're considering the theme Australian fairy tales, flesh or fossil. We'll finish up. But what drew you to the theme?
Oh, just the way that my own life was so much like a fairy tale, and how much my life has been informed by fairy tales, and how often I told myself fairy tales, and how I inserted myself into the fairy tale, and how as an adult I kind of circled back and used the structure of the fairy tale in the form of a folk tale as part of this novel. In telling stories myself. So fairy tales have always been a part of my life. So when I saw that as a conference, I thought I'm going to have to go and check this out.
Thank you so much, Laura. I've really enjoyed speaking to you and learning what's informed your storytelling and your writing, and what drew you to fairy tales. So thank you so much for talking to me. I'm your podcast host, Annie Stewart, and I've been talking with Laura Fulton. All fairy tale enthusiasts are welcome to attend a fairy tale ring. You can do it either online or in your state, or to attend the conference coming up in Brisbane on October the 1st to the 2nd, 2022. There we'll explore the question, Australian fairy tales, flesh or fossil. To learn more, visit australianfairytalesociety.org, or our social media tag is @AustFairyTales. Once again, thank you, Laura, and I look forward to meeting you in person at the conference.